The conclave of eternal vigilance had watched the stars for longer than most species had existed. They floated in vast crystalline ships between galaxies, their bodies made of light and thought, and something older than matter itself. They had seen empires rise and fall across 1,000 worlds. They had guided young species toward peaceful existence and watched others burn themselves to ash. They kept order in a universe that tended toward chaos, and they did so with the patience of beings who measured time in millions of years. When their sensors first detected the small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, they felt no particular interest. The galaxy contained billions of such worlds. Most held nothing but bacteria and simple plants. A few developed creatures that walked and thought and built primitive shelters. These were cataloged and monitored, checked once every 1,000 years for signs of advancement. Almost none ever surprised them. Observer was assigned to the new world as part of routine documentation. Its crystalline form pulsed with the soft blue light of a junior member, barely 10,000 years old by conclave standards, extended its consciousness across the void, and examined the planet they would later learn was called Earth. The dominant species lived in small groups scattered across the landmasses. They wore animal skins and carried sharpened sticks. They painted crude images on cave walls and buried their dead with flowers, recorded their population at roughly 5 million individuals, and noted their tribal social structures. The observer calculated their rate of development using standard models refined over countless observations. At their current pace, these creatures would require approximately 400,000 years to achieve basic metallurgy, another million years to discover writing, perhaps 3 million years before they posed any need for active monitoring, marked the planet for passive observation, and turned its attention to more pressing matters elsewhere in the sector. 3,000 years passed. To the conclave, this was less than a heartbeat. When the standard Millennium Review came due, almost skipped the small blue world entirely. There was never anything worth noting in such brief intervals. But protocol demanded documentation and extended its censors toward the planet with the same lack of interest one might bring to reading a grocery list. The readings made no sense. Ran the calculations again, then 7 more times before accepting what the instruments showed. The atmosphere contained chemical signatures of industrial combustion. Electromagnetic radiation leaked from the surface in waves that could only come from artificial sources. The population had exploded from 5 million to nearly 8 billion. In 3,000 years. The observer's form flickered with something the conclave had not experienced in eons. It took several moments to identify the sensation. It was uncertainty. The high chamber was convened for the first time in 400 cycles. All 12 members of the Elder Council gathered their consciousness in the great void between stars, their ancient forms casting light across dimensions humans could not perceive. They examined the data had compiled, and for a long moment, none of them spoke. The recordings played before them in sequence. Mud huts became stone temples, bronze gave way to iron, ships crossed vast oceans, machines powered by steam and coal transformed the surface of the planet. Then came the discovery that would change everything the conclave thought they knew about development. The humans had split the atom. High Arbiter, the oldest member of the council, watched the mushroom cloud rise over a place called Hiroshima. The Arbiter's form had witnessed the birth and death of stars. It had seen species achieve transcendence and others destroy themselves in nuclear fire, but had never seen a species develop atomic weapons less than 50 rotations after achieving powered flight. The models said it was impossible. The mathematics of development had been refined over millions of years of observation. Every species followed the same general pattern, give or take a few thousand years. Slow, steady progress, careful advancement, the gradual accumulation of knowledge across generations. Earth broke every model they had ever created. How? Asked council member. its form rippling with colors that expressed confusion and concern. How did they advance so quickly? Displayed more data. The humans had done something the Conclave had never observed before. They had divided themselves into competing groups and spent their brief lives fighting each other. Wars swept across their world in waves. Nations rose and fell. Empires conquered and collapsed. Millions died in conflicts over territory and resources and ideas. And somehow, impossibly, this chaos had driven them forward faster than any peaceful species had ever advanced. Their competition accelerates innovation, explained, though the observer clearly struggled to believe its own analysis. When one group develops a new weapon, others must match or exceed it to survive. When one nation builds faster ships, others must build faster ships as well. They race against each other constantly, and the result is. The observer gestured toward the planet below, now glittering with the lights of countless cities visible from space. High Arbiter processed this information in silence. The Conclave had spent eons carefully guiding species toward peaceful coexistence. They had learned long ago that war and conflict led to destruction. Species that fought themselves inevitably burned out before reaching the stars. It was a universal law, written into the very nature of development. Or so they had believed. Continue observation, finally commanded. Increase monitoring frequency to continuous coverage. Assign additional observers as needed. Do not intervene. The council dispersed, but none of them could shake the unease that had settled into their ancient forms. They had watched the galaxy for longer than the humans had existed as a species. They had seen everything the universe had to offer. They had never seen anything like this. Over the next several decades, the Conclave assembled a dedicated research collective of 12,000 observers. All of them focused on the single blue world that had somehow broken the laws they thought governed all existence. The data streams from Earth consumed more processing capacity than the rest of their monitored sectors combined. The humans showed no signs of slowing down. They developed computers that could perform calculations faster than organic minds. They mapped the code that defined their own biology. They sent machines to other planets in their system, then sent themselves into orbit around their own world. They built networks that connected minds across their entire planet, allowing ideas to spread at the speed of light. And still they fought, still they competed, still they raced against each other toward destinations none of them could clearly see. Observer began cataloging human cultural artifacts, trying to understand what drove these impossible creatures. It found their music first, vast libraries of sound that ranged from simple rhythms to complex symphonies. The compositions used frequencies and patterns the Conclave had never imagined employing for communication. They carried emotional content that struggled to analyze. Then came the literature. The humans told stories. This was not unusual in itself. Many species developed narrative traditions to pass knowledge between generations. But human stories were different. They wrote about impossible things. They imagined technologies that did not exist and futures they could not possibly predict. They created tales of traveling faster than light, of meeting beings from other worlds, of reaching across the stars to touch the infinite. And in their stories, they were never afraid. Found science fiction archives spanning more than a century of human creativity. In story after story, humans encountered alien civilizations more powerful than themselves. Sometimes these encounters were peaceful, often they were not, but in nearly every tale the humans survived. They fought back against impossible odds. They found ways to defeat enemies that should have been unbeatable. They won. "They imagine us," reported to the High Chamber, its form flickering with an emotion that might have been distress. "They write stories about meeting beings like us. They prepare themselves through fiction for encounters they have no evidence will ever occur. And in their stories they are not the prey. They are the victors." The council absorbed this information in silence. For beings who had existed since before most stars were born, the idea of being imagined by primitives should have been laughable. But none of them felt like laughing. High Arbiter ordered a complete threat assessment. Every observer assigned to Earth was tasked with a single question. When would these creatures reach the stars? And what would they do when they arrived? The results came faster than expected. Human technology was advancing at a rate that continued to defy all known models. At their current pace, they would achieve interstellar travel within 200 years, possibly sooner if their competition continued to drive innovation. The assessment noted that humans had already begun planning expeditions to other stars. They had already identified potentially habitable worlds within reach of their future ships. But it was the psychological analysis that disturbed the Council most. Every other species the Conclave had guided toward the stars had approached the universe with a certain humility. They knew they were small. They knew they were young. They came seeking wisdom and knowledge and peaceful integration with the greater community of minds that inhabited the galaxy. The humans showed no signs of this humility. They looked at the universe and saw not an order to be accepted, but a challenge to be conquered. Their competitive nature, the very thing that had driven them to advance so quickly, would not simply disappear once they left their world. They would bring it with them. They would carry their hunger and their curiosity and their relentless drive into the void between stars. And there, for the first time in their eternal existence, the conclave of eternal vigilance might find themselves facing something they had never encountered before. Competition. High Arbiter spoke the words that none of them wanted to hear. Emergency protocols are now active. For the first time since the founding of the conclave, we face a potential threat to galactic stability. All observers are to remain on high alert. All council members are to prepare contingency analyses. The Arbiter's form pulsed with ancient light as it turned its attention toward the small blue world that had somehow, impossibly, terrified beings older than most stars. We need to decide what to do about humanity before humanity decides what to do about us. The debate consumed the conclave for the next 3 decades. By human measurement, this was a significant portion of a lifetime. For beings who had existed for millions of years, it was an almost frantic pace. Nothing in their long history had ever required such urgent deliberation. The council met continuously. 12,000 observers fed constant data streams from Earth, while the elders argued about what to do with the information. Factions formed and dissolved and reformed around different proposals. For the first time anyone could remember, the conclave was divided. The intervention faction spoke first and loudest. They proposed subtle manipulation of Earth's development through the introduction of stabilizing philosophies. The conclave had done this before with other species, seeding ideas that promoted peace and cooperation over competition and conflict. Religious concepts, ethical frameworks, social structures that dampened individual ambition in favor of collective harmony. These interventions had always worked. They slowed advancement to manageable rates and produced civilizations that could be integrated into the galactic order without disruption. We can still guide them, argued Council Member L, its form pulsing with the confident green of a believer. Their development is rapid, but they are still confined to their single world. We have time to introduce moderating influences. Another century of careful work and they could become like any other species, peaceful, stable, controllable. But others raised objections. Observer, who had first detected Earth's anomalous development, presented data that challenged the intervention approach. Their history suggests they are resistant to such manipulation, explained. They have produced countless philosophers promoting peace and harmony, religious traditions that preach cooperation over conflict, social movements dedicated to ending war and violence, and yet the competition continues. The drive to advance faster than their rivals persists despite every attempt to suppress it. Something in their fundamental nature resists what we would try to impose. The quarantine faction offered another solution. They proposed constructing barriers around Earth's solar system, invisible walls of manipulated space that would prevent human ships from ever leaving their home region. The humans could develop all they wanted within their small cage. They could reach other planets in their own system, build colonies, create whatever civilizations they chose, but they would never threaten the greater galaxy. This proposal gained significant support among the more cautious council members. It seemed elegant in its simplicity. No direct intervention required. No risk of detection. The humans would simply never know that they were prisoners. But High Arbiter raised a question that silenced the quarantine advocates, and when they discovered the barrier, the council fell still. "We have never encountered a species with their capacity for investigation," continued. "They study everything. They question everything. They take apart every mystery they encounter and examine its components until they understand it completely. If we construct a barrier, they will eventually discover it. And what happens then?" Answered, its form dim with concern. "They will try to break it. They will dedicate every resource at their disposal to understanding our technology and defeating it, and based on their rate of advancement." The observer paused, running calculations. "They may succeed faster than we would like to believe possible." A minority faction proposed the unthinkable: destruction, sterilization of the planet before the infection could spread. It was the most certain solution. The humans had not yet developed technology capable of detecting the Conclave's weapons. A precisely applied burst of radiation could eliminate all life on Earth within hours. The planet would become just another dead world, unremarkable and forgotten. The destruction faction was small but vocal. They argued that the risk humanity posed to galactic stability outweighed any moral considerations. Species had destroyed themselves before. This would simply be assisted self-destruction, accelerated natural selection, a necessary pruning of the universal garden. But even those who feared humanity most could not embrace this option without reservation. The Conclave had never deliberately destroyed a species. They had watched species destroy themselves many times, but that was different. That was the natural consequence of civilizations that could not control their own destructive impulses. To actively exterminate a world of 8 billion conscious beings was something else entirely. The debate might have continued for decades more if not for an unexpected development. Observer, still cataloging human cultural production, discovered something that changed the nature of the discussion entirely. The humans had begun writing stories about the Conclave. Not literally, of course. They had no evidence that the Conclave existed, but their fiction contained entities remarkably similar to the ancient observers who watched them from beyond the stars. Vast, incomprehensible intelligences that monitored younger species and made judgments about their fitness to survive. The humans called them by many names: watchers, overseers, cosmic gardeners, advanced civilizations that managed the galaxy like farmers managing crops. And in story after story, these godlike beings faced the same decision the Conclave now confronted: what to do about humanity. "They are rehearsing," reported, its form flickering with colors that expressed amazement and fear in equal measure. "They create scenarios in their fiction and explore every possible outcome. They imagine beings like us deciding to destroy them, and they write stories about surviving the attempt. They imagine beings like us trying to manipulate them, and they write stories about recognizing and resisting the manipulation. They imagine beings like us constructing barriers to contain them, and they write stories about breaking through." The council processed this information in stunned silence. "They are practicing," continued. "Every story they tell is a simulation. Every novel, every film, every game is a training exercise. They are preparing themselves for encounters they have no proof will ever happen, and they are getting better at it. Their solutions become more sophisticated with each telling. Their strategies become more effective." High Arbiter finally spoke. The ancient being's form pulsed with light that the younger observers had never seen before. It took a moment for them to recognize the emotion. It was fear. Every intervention we consider, said slowly, has already been imagined by them. Every weapon we might deploy, every manipulation we might attempt, every barrier we might construct. They have written about these things. They have thought about how to defeat them. They have prepared. The Arbiter turned its attention to the destruction faction. And if we try to destroy them and fail, if even a small portion of their population survives, you have seen their history. You know what they do to enemies who threaten their existence. The destruction advocates fell silent. They had indeed seen human history. They had watched humans fight wars of annihilation against each other. They had observed the relentless pursuit of defeated enemies, the complete subjugation of conquered peoples, the near-total destruction of any group that posed an existential threat. If the Conclave tried to destroy humanity and failed, they would not face a species seeking peaceful resolution. They would face a species unified by hatred and driven by the same competitive fury that had carried them from cave paintings to nuclear weapons in the blink of a cosmic eye. What if we fail? Asked again, and no one had an answer. The debate shifted. The question was no longer which intervention to choose. The question became whether any intervention was wise at all. Presented the analysis that would ultimately decide the matter. If we reveal ourselves through hostile action and fail to destroy them completely, we will have created exactly the enemy we feared. They will unify against us. They will turn that terrifying ingenuity toward our annihilation, and based on their rate of advancement. The observer displayed projections that made every member of the council pulse with alarm. Within 500 years of detecting our existence, they would likely possess technology capable of threatening our ships. Within 1,000 years, they could challenge us directly. Within 2,000 years, form dimmed to nearly nothing. We may not survive long enough to regret our decision. The council sat in silence for a long moment, contemplating a future none of them had ever imagined possible. Finally, High Arbiter spoke the words that would reshape galactic policy for epochs to come. We will not intervene, we will not attack, we will not manipulate, we will not quarantine. The council waited for the explanation they knew was coming. Instead, continued, we will prepare. For the first time in our eternal existence, we will build defenses, not against asteroids or stellar events or the slow entropy that claims all things eventually. We will build defenses against a single species on a single world who have looked at the stars and seen not mysteries to be revered, but territories to be claimed. The Arbiter's form blazed with ancient light, brighter than it had shone in millions of years. We have guided the galaxy toward peace for longer than most stars have burned. We have never faced competition. We have never needed to. But these creatures will bring competition to us whether we wish it or not. And if we are to survive their arrival, we must learn to compete as well. The order went out to every member of the conclave. A new era had begun. In the years that followed, the conclave transformed in ways none of them had ever anticipated. Ships that had drifted peacefully between stars for millions of years were retrofitted with weapons systems based on technology the conclave had observed but never needed to develop. Defense stations were constructed at strategic points throughout the galaxy, hidden from younger species but ready to activate if needed. For the first time, the conclave recruited. They approached species they had guided toward peaceful existence and offered them knowledge in exchange for alliance. Many accepted, grateful for the attention of their ancient benefactors. Few understood the true reason for the conclave's sudden interest in cooperation. Those who did understand shared the conclave's fear. Observer was assigned to permanent monitoring of Earth. The work consumed the observer's entire existence. Every development in human technology was analyzed for military potential. Every advancement in physics was examined for its implications regarding interstellar travel. Every shift in human culture was evaluated for signs that might indicate when the expansion would begin. The humans continued to surprise them. They developed artificial intelligences that could think faster than organic minds. They began editing the code of their own biology, removing diseases and extending. They built structures that reached into space from the surface of their planet, reducing the cost of leaving their world by orders of magnitude. They identified exoplanets that might support life and began designing ships to reach them. And still they competed, still they raced against each other, still they fought. But something else emerged in human culture that the Conclave had not expected. Alongside the competition, there was cooperation. Alongside the conflict, there was kindness. Humans could be brutal and violent and terrifying, but they could also be gentle and generous and astonishingly brave. They sacrificed themselves for strangers. They shared resources with enemies. They built institutions dedicated to helping those they would never meet. Still studying human culture, suggested that this might be the key to surviving first contact. They are not simply predators, the observer argued. They contain multitudes. Competition and cooperation exist together in their nature. If we approach them correctly, we might appeal to the cooperative aspects of their psychology. We might find ways to work with them rather than against them. The suggestion was controversial. Many in the conclave believed that any approach to humanity was too risky. Better to maintain distance and prepare for the worst. But High Arbiter saw wisdom in analysis. We have spent millions of years managing the galaxy, the Arbiter mused. We have guided and shaped and controlled. Perhaps that era is ending. Perhaps these creatures represent something new, not subjects to be managed but partners to be engaged, competitors to be respected. The conclave began preparing two sets of protocols, one for conflict, one for cooperation. They did not know which would be needed. They could not predict which future would unfold. They could only watch and wait and wonder. 50 years passed, then 100. The humans built their first ships capable of traveling between stars. They were primitive vessels by conclave standards, barely capable of reaching the nearest systems. But they were real. They worked. And the humans who crewed them showed no sign of the fear that should have accompanied their first journey into the infinite void. They showed only excitement, wonder, hunger. The conclave's outer defense stations detected the ships as they left the solar system. Alarms that had been dormant for eons activated throughout the network of observers. The moment they had been dreading and preparing for had finally arrived. Humanity was coming. High Arbiter convened the council for what might be the most important decision in their long existence. The question was simple. The answer would shape the future of the galaxy. Should they reveal themselves, or should they remain hidden and let humanity discover them on their own terms? Arguments flew back and forth across dimensions. The risks of revelation were obvious. Humans might react with fear and hostility. They might see the conclave as a threat to be eliminated. They might unite against the ancient observers with all the terrifying energy they had shown throughout their history. But the risks of remaining hidden might be worse. If humans discovered the conclave on their own, they might interpret the long silence as evidence of hostile intent. They might assume the worst about beings who had watched them without making contact. They might strike first and ask questions never. In the end, it was who offered the argument that decided the matter. We have watched them for thousands of years, the observer said. We have studied their every thought and creation. We know them better than they know themselves, but they do not know us at all. Every fear we have is based on assumptions about how they will react. Every projection is based on models that their species has already broken countless times. Swarm pulsed with something new, not fear, not uncertainty, something that might have been hope. Perhaps it is time to let them surprise us. The conclave agreed. The first contact message was simple. It contained basic mathematical concepts, a primer on the conclave's language, and an invitation to communicate. It was transmitted on frequencies the human ships could detect, aimed at the small fleet now making its way toward the nearest star. The response came within hours, faster than any species had ever replied to such a message. It was not hostile, it was not fearful, it was not even particularly surprised. The humans had been waiting for this moment. They had been preparing for it in their stories and their games and their dreams. They had imagined countless variations of first contact and rehearsed their responses until they were ready for whatever the universe might offer them. "Hello," the message said. "We've been hopping. Someone was out there. We have questions. We imagine you do too. Where should we start?" In the great void between stars, the conclave of eternal vigilance experienced something they had not felt in millions of years: surprise. And beneath the surprise, something else. Something that had no name in their ancient language, but that humans knew very well. Curiosity. The cosmos had changed. An old order was ending and something new was beginning. The conclave did not know what that something would look like. They did not know if they would survive it. But for the first time in their eternal existence, they found themselves looking forward to finding out. Somewhere on Earth, in a small room filled with books and papers, an old woman watched the news with tears streaming down her face. The message had been made public. Everyone on Earth knew that humanity was no longer alone in the universe. Her granddaughter sat beside her, eyes wide with wonder. "Are you scared, Grandma?" the child asked. The old woman smiled and pulled her granddaughter close. "No," she said. "I'm proud. We've been reaching for the stars since we first looked up and wondered what they were. Now we know that someone was looking back. And they didn't try to destroy us or control us or keep us in a cage. They invited us to talk." She squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "That means they think we're worth talking to. After everything we've done, all the wars and the cruelty and the stupidity, they still think we might be worth knowing. That gives me hope, little one. That gives me hope." The child looked up at the sky, though it was midday and the stars were not visible. "Do you think they're watching us right now?" The old woman laughed. "Oh, I'm certain of it. They've probably been watching us for a very long time, and I hope we gave them a good show." Out in the darkness between stars, the conclave of eternal vigilance continued its eternal vigil. But it was not the same conclave that had watched a species of primitives paint crude images on cave walls 3,000 years ago. It was something new. Something that had been changed by its encounter with a species that refused to follow the rules. In the quietest frequencies of their communications, the designation for Earth was updated one final time. No longer was it labeled simply as Apex Concern. Now it carried a new classification, one that had never been applied to any species in the long history of the conclave's observation. Equals. And in the great archives of the universe, a new chapter began to be written, not by ancient beings who had watched the cosmos since before most stars were born, not by young creatures who had risen from caves to reach the stars in the blink of a cosmic eye, but by both together, learning from each other what it meant to be alive in a universe vast enough to contain multitudes. The stars continued to burn, the galaxies continued to spin, and somewhere in the darkness between them, humanity and the conclave began the long, uncertain, wonderful process of figuring out what came next. The end had become a beginning. And the beginning was just getting started.